We have a patient waiting in the green room, my friend Dr. Phil Meyers. Dr. Meyers is a chiropractic physician living and working in my hometown, St. Louis, Missouri. The quick and easy way to get started with Dr. Meyers is to do the following. You call his office, you set up that first private, no-charge consultation on the telephone, and you call the office at the following number. Area code 314-878-6868. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning, John. How are you this morning?
Outstanding, sir. Looking forward to another beautiful, fun, productive day. How about yourself?
Same here. We're doing a garage sale this weekend, so we're getting rid of our dust collectors. So we know exactly what you're talking about.
Well, myself and Dr. Moore did that once. I never worked so hard for so little money in all my life.
It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. And I think I calculated, my economic return was about $1.50 per hour. For a really long day.
Yeah.
But it's kind of fun. You get to meet people, and it is fun to get that stuff out of the way and turn it into cash. That's great.
Well, one of the biggest things is that part, but what it does is it clears your space. It clears the space that you have in your life to open your doors for other things. Like, okay, I don't need these things anymore in my life, and it opens up the door for new things to show up.
Absolutely. That's a good way to look at it, and there's a lot of truth to that, Doctor.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, one of the biggest things of any type of energetic work or feng shui work is clearing your space. It's one of the biggest rules to do is to work on clearing your space, and it's huge. And I always teach people that the first thing you want to start doing is clearing your space, and what you do is you either give away or throw away.
Well, sometimes that happens on our behalf by a level of intelligence which many of us call God. The first 5 years I was a homicide detective, the state of Missouri legislature cut the funding for my job, eliminating my job, and I was very, very disappointed when that happened, thinking, this is really not a good thing. But that had to happen in order for other things to happen, Doctor. That had to happen first. That had to happen first. And looking back on it, I see how necessary that was. I didn't understand it at the time, but I completely understand it now.
Yeah, a lot of things that don't look like they're to your advantage are actually the opportunities for growth. And when you start looking at it that way, it opens up the doors for a lot of things to happen for you.
Well, that brings us back to a book that we talk about occasionally. We haven't talked about it on air for a while. It's a free download. The copyright's long expired. You can get new copies on Amazon for $3 or $4. The title of the book is The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Dr. Joseph Murphy. And this all plays into it, doesn't it, Doctor? Oh,
extremely. And a lot of it is just the goals we have set in our mind. And a lot of times when those goals don't happen, either you're telling yourself to set these goals, you're expecting someone in your life to do something, which is a goal you're setting for them, or the universe, the world. It's like, bring me this, and it doesn't happen. It creates a lot of stress in your life. And if that goal isn't being fulfilled in you, all you keep doing is playing the program over and over again, saying, happen, 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 happen. And what you start noticing, if you become aware of it, you're more tense, you're breathing less, you're moving less, you're interacting less, and you're starting to get angry, frustrated, hostile, fearful. And so learning to recognize sometimes the goals that you're setting might, if they're not happening, one of the biggest things is you might want to just cancel that goal and move on and open the door for something else to happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, people need to understand these concepts because they're so foundational to moving forward in life, achieving the goals that we want to achieve, having a fun, full, productive, healthy life that every human being can and should have, Doctor.
Absolutely.
Well, what health-related things do you want to talk about this morning, sir?
Well, our last conversation, one of our callers called in and was talking about their grandchild who isn't focusing on them. Like they have no ability to connect. The child doesn't have ability to connect. And what I had mentioned is it's due to these neurological reflexes not firing right. And so what we call in neuroscience neonatal reflexes, basically meaning your baby reflexes. These are when we're born, you're born in you're not born like animals. If a cow, as soon as a cow is born, it's born walking and running and galloping and doing all those different types of things right off the bat. Babies of the human race, on the other hand, are not. They require their parents to carry them everywhere, to change them, to feed them, to do all these different types of things. If that parent wasn't around, they would just be on the floor and just pass on. And so developed within our bodies are these little reflexes. They're very powerful reflexes that help you survive. They're designed to help you survive and then to grow and survive in the positive spectrum versus the fight, flight, get me the heck out of here survival mode of cortisol and stress. These reflexes, we all know them, and they're the cutest little things when the baby grabs your little finger and won't let go. That's a Palmer reflex. That is one of the neonatal reflexes. When the baby latches on to the mother's breast to suckle and then root into its gullet the milk. Those are reflexes. There's two major ones just to do that action. So there's many reflexes that you have going on. We all notice that the baby pulls up its little legs and pulls up into that little ball, and we're like, oh, here's my little baked potato. How cute is that? And that's a reflex that the child has in order to help digestion and to kick off and to push and kick off the mom's belly in order to lift itself up towards the breast. These are reflexes designed in our bodies to help us survive and to grow. And they're amazing. And we watch them completely just in awestruck of how cute our little babies are, and recognizing that it's these little reflexes that make them even cuter.
Doctor, when my daughter was born, I think she was about 5 or 6 minutes old at the most, when I placed my little finger in her right palm. I wanted to have one of her first sensations to be in her right palm. I don't know if there's anything to that becoming right-handed or not, but I hoped that she would become right-handed, because left-handed people are really challenged in our society. But her little hand just grasped my finger as soon as I touched it.
Yeah. Yeah, they're automatic, and what those reflexes do is they help develop your brain. The more they're used, and the more they're active, the more the brain gets the brain cells start turning on, and then one little nerve cell communicates with another nerve cell on one side of the brain. And it creates a local communication factor of saying, "Hey, this if I start grabbing this thing and I can pull it towards me. Oh wow, look at that!" And it starts developing what we just call your hand-eye coordination, or hand toy into mouth. Little thing. Like babies are always but what they're doing is they're starting to develop these brain cells, and then eventually, after enough local brain cells start firing and wiring together, and on the left or the right brain, depending on what reflex is generating it, it then kicks over to the other brain of similar brain cells. Just like a phone call. It's like, hey, there's people that are listening to on our frequency. Let's communicate with them, see what they're saying. So you have maybe for the right brain, which is your very imaginative brain, very spiritual, think outside the box brain. And it's like, you know what, this local brain cells in the right brain say, hey, let's start communicating with the local brain cells on the left side, which are very finite, very physical, very mental, are very concrete in their thinking pattern. And let's take our imaginative ability and talk to the concrete people and see what we can create. And so you get a remote connection between the left and the right brains. And so that's what's going on inside the brain. What we see out in the world is, oh, wow, look at little Susie. She's recognizing that I'm mommy and you're daddy. And she's recognizing the smells and the tastes and the touches from these reflexes that spawned these neurological connections to start being active. And that's all about how we communicate with ourself and with our environment and the people around us. And these reflexes start developing and developing and developing. What happens, though, at some stage in our experience here on Earth is those reflexes get stressed, have trauma, have an experience that basically keeps it diminished in its ability to communicate within itself on either the local level or communicate on the remote level on the left and right brain interplay. And so we call that a retainment of the reflexive pattern. And it shows up as a delayment in development. And so the baby stops communicating with itself, and then, i.e., stops communicating within its environment about said experience, whatever that is. We start seeing that as a disconnect in how they focus with their eyes and how they pay attention with their ears. And then as they develop more and more, from 6 months to 9 months to 12 months, 18 months, you start noticing, wow, you know what, Johnny's not doing what Susie is doing at the same age. What's going on here? Or you start noticing it after an exposure of some sort. And what's happened is those reflexes got traumatized. The neurological network got interfered with. And what happens with that interference, not only at this local and remote level within the brain synapses and how it communicates with the environment, the reflex itself is supposed to help your body breathe. And so you start noticing a breathing pattern that isn't as fluid as it should be. And that breathing, so the body is either then starting to be stuck and retained in a breathing pattern of either an inhalation or an exhalation. And what that starts creating is a movement pattern of dysfunction in a developmental stage that they're stuck in because of the stress response at the time that they got exposed to whatever it was. And that starts creating the brain to not fire right, the sutures in the skull to not move right, the reflexes to start becoming more and more diminished and not so active and fine-tuned. They start becoming like, wow, they have to use a lot of effort to do these simple tasks instead of just going through it perfectly. And that's what we call these retained neonatal reflexes. And it creates this spectrum of disharmony within our body, which then we as doctors and as human beings of observation start seeing as diseases. And so we start giving them names. And we start noticing, oh, wow, they're not paying attention, or they have no attention span. Well, it's not that they don't have an attention span. They can't focus, and they lose the ability to look left and right to left, up, down. Their neck isn't moving quite the way it should.
We have
the
a break.
Reflexes have been diminished.
We have a break. Quick, easy, simple. Call his office, set it up. Here's the office number, 314-878-6868. Let's continue, Doctor.
So what happens is when these reflexes that we've been talking about get retained, one of the biggest things that happens is the breath becomes retained, and it gets stuck in that same dysfunctional loop, and it will hold a pattern of thought, it will hold a pattern of belief, of emotions that child ends up growing into throughout its life, and taking on the labels that it's been given, and a lot of different things as it gets older and older and older, from its adolescence into its teenage, into its 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And whether you're working on it as a child, when I see them like I'm taking care of a 6-month-old with these reflexes retained, that the mom's like, he's just not developing quite like his brother at this time. Like, oh yeah, his breathing pattern's off, his diaphragm's not moving correctly, his skull's stuck in this pattern, it's affecting his digestion this way. And so what do? Is I start moving the skull, I start moving the cervical spine, so in terms of how to get the breath back. And as the breath starts coming back, more movement starts being created. And what it does is it turns back on the reflex. And so the reflex then can start reconnecting locally in that brain center and start connecting remotely to the other brain center on the opposite side. And then all of a sudden, then now that it's communicating within itself, it looks outwardly to the environment to reconnect to the environment in the same fashion, locally and then remotely. And the mom, after two adjustments, was like, oh my God, he's sleeping better, he's not crying as much, his digestion is so much better, he's pooping like crazy now, and he's eating all the time, and he's more interactive with my husband and myself, and just from 2 little adjustments on a 6-month-old. And so now what happens is that 6-month-old that would have never seen me grows up through its adolescent years, and then through other issues that created more retainment from exposures to different substances and different environmental toxins, that retainment becomes more and more and more concrete. And so just like the brain cells that should be connecting on a local remote at a higher consciousness level, it stays dormant. And so now you're 20 years old, and you've been training yourself in these brain cells to only fire in this way instead of the higher consciousness way. So as we start fixing the reflexes now at 20, it's going to take a little bit longer to build the brain cells up that should have been built up when you were a baby. And the diseases and the disease function in the body and the energy that's supposed to be moved has not been moving for now 20 years instead of only 6 months of your life. So just think of the river. It's not flowing for 20 years in a community. It's going to really affect that community, isn't it? Versus if it's just off for a couple months.
Absolutely.
It's the same with the neural network in our brain and our ecosystem of our gut and how our heart works and brain works. It's the same thing. If it's for a short period of time, okay. But if it's for 20 years, 40 years, 60 years, it's going to start showing.
Guys and gals in California, that's where most of our calls come from. That phone number is 314-878-6868. Doctor, we got a regular caller on hold here. We got Rick in Missouri. Good morning, Rick.
Good morning, John. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning, Rick.
Good morning. I was going to wait until I got there to ask this question, but then I thought, well, no, maybe it would be better to ask it now. And if you were avoiding saying this, then my apologies. When you were talking about the neonatal reflex getting traumatized or stuck, and you attributed it to, well, I think you were a little vague about what it was. You just kind of said some trauma, but I'm wondering, could that trauma be vaccinations?
The stress and the traumas come from the environment and from any type of exposure that puts the system into a state of protection of the non-positive side. Like I said, these reflexes are designed to help protect you on the positive spectrum.
Yeah. You mean like Daddy yelling at Mama? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. That would be a stress and trauma that would create the protection to be retained. For example, one of the reflexes is called the fear paralysis reflex, which stops which emotionally is about not being able to experience joy and feeling that one is unworthy of a joyful experience. So if that child is growing up in an environment where yelling and screaming and disconnection between love and support is the norm, then that child's reflexive pattern is going to say, oh, wow, well, life sucks, and it's a struggle, and happiness and joyful and true love and all that kind of stuff doesn't exist in the world. Well, that reflex also is that fear paralysis reflex that controls your whole entire digestive gut. And so that child is going to be led more into not trusting what their gut's telling them due to the retainment of that reflex, not trusting in its ability to experience connection, love, and joy.
Well,
now, that can go from a very small spectrum for a very large spectrum of issues.
Right. Well, it would make you wonder what the Nazi experiments of the 40s, where they took those children and kept them from all human contact and just let them sit in a plastic bassinet all day. I guess they were trying to produce a super soldier, but I'm guessing they created a bunch of psychos.
Pretty much. Yeah, that's because it creates is a social disconnect, and then the person that was then the quote caregiver, they saw that person reflexively as their only means of support that they'll follow and do anything for, because that power person gave them some sort of life-giving energy. Okay. So it didn't matter if they said jump off a cliff with a bomb attached to your shoulders. They're going to do it because that's what they grew up in.
Right.
And these reflexive patterns hold on to these belief structures, even though they have no basis in reality at all.
Okay, so the neonatal thing is not necessarily negatively impacted by the vaccinations we all seem to have to get.
That's another thing, though. But the thimerosal, the mercury, scientifically shows that it does create a retainment of reflexes, but not so much on the emotional level. Now you're talking that it came in from a biochemical level. Right. So you can have a child that's in a loving environment, completely surrounded in love and care and all that kind of stuff from a mental emotional standpoint, but now it got toxically exposed by thimerosal and mercury that retained that reflex, creating the same social disconnect. And even though in the same loving environment, it smacks you away and says, it's like, don't touch me, because it's overstimulated by external stimulus. And that's one of the effects of these reflexes that get retained, is an oversensitization of external stimulus, light, sound, taste, touch, and movement. It's too much information because the reflex is designed to help slow down that data. 200 million bits of data per second that are coming into the body. Well, if the reflex is biochemically retained and intoxified, it can't slow down that data, and so it becomes irritated and irritable. And so that's what you end up seeing from these children, even though they're mental, emotionally in a loving environment, biochemically, that reflex just got trashed.
Oh, that's some spooky stuff, isn't it?
Well, it's what's happening. And the thing is, it's over. There is what we're seeing with these vaccinations is it's a big punch to the system. Whereas, for example, the pesticides in the food does the same thing, but over a short, long period of time. It's little by little, and eventually crash. Or it's the chemtrails, the aluminum. It's just little exposure, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Oh, my God, I have dysbiosis of the gut, and I have Crohn's disease. What happened?
Yes.
It's the same. Well, it's the same stuff. And so everything that you, me, and John talk about, and everybody's complaining about, in terms of environmental toxins, of all these stuff, what is it doing? It is affecting these neurological reflexes. Period. Sometimes it's from a mental emotional, like you just talked about with the Nazis, or a really crappy home environment, or it's from a biochemical thing from the environment and toxins and vaccinations. It could also be from physical stress, whiplashes, concussions, surgeries, can do it from a physical standpoint. So, or you can get it from an electrical standpoint, cell phones and wires and towers and computers and these electrical signals that are so, have so many different frequencies that are interfering with your own frequencies that it interferes with the way the neurons connect and synapse with each other, retaining the reflexes. So you can get it on many levels, and depending on how what the stress, trauma, or event, an environmental event was, it's going to affect that person differently.
Well, it seems like it's almost impossible to dodge this stuff, and I think I've been exposed to every single thing you just listed.
And that's the thing, is you're exposed to it so that you then now have to take responsibility in your life or as a caregiver for the life that you're in charge of to make sure that that neurological system is always being fed good, healthy movements, good, healthy breath, all these things. And for example, a first-time mom, ecstatic that she got pregnant, goes through the 9 months, is all happy to go to wherever to go get the baby, and the baby there's a distress in the pregnancy and the labor, and oh my God, I have to do an emergency C-section. So then the baby is now pulled out of the womb instead of going down the birth canal. Well, that is a stress trauma event that will no doubt affect the reflexes of the breathing pattern and all the different things that happen when you were supposed to go down the birth canal. You were supposed to have your entire body squished and then opened up in an instant once you left the birth canal, giving you a full inhalational breath.
Huh.
But that doesn't happen when you're pulled out of the womb through a C-section. There's no contraction. There's no expansion of the bony structures, cartilaginous structures of the body, affecting the diaphragmatic breath through the brainstem. That doesn't happen. So the child's reflexive patterns are delayed and retained in their respiratory function, their digestive function, their brain function.
It seems like what you're saying.
Most of the time, I can tell a person, like, you were a C-section baby, weren't you? Like, how'd you know? Like, well, because you have this, and this. And only C-section babies have this, and this.
Well, it almost seems like you're suggesting that birth was part of God's plan, and altering it is probably not the best move. I know it. That's I'll always take it to the extreme.
Yeah, exactly. What are you talking about, this God thing? I don't know.
Yeah, thanks a million. I'll talk to you in a while.
You too, Rick.
Okay, thank you for the call, Rick. We appreciate it. We have time for another call or two here at 800-313-9443. The more I listen to you, Doctor, the more I learn, the more I understand how it's all connected, how things aren't optional, that everything happens for a reason, including something that we take for granted, like the normal birth procedure. If that's not followed, it leads to all kinds of unwanted circumstances, doesn't it?
Doctor? You mentioned the vaccinations. And so let's just talk about that. You have a child that's just out of the womb, is expecting, their reflexes are expecting love, connection, clean air, clean food, clean environment, and they get bombarded with mercury. That's going to, and it scientifically shows that affects the neurological reflexes. It retains them. And it will create brain dysfunction, a social disconnect. That local firing of the brain cells will not, to their umpteenth potential, fire properly and then cross over to the remote opposite brain to connect to the same brain cells that are supposed to then help it take its imaginative and its finite abilities, its left and right brain capacity for logical and imaginative thought and creativity. That doesn't happen. One side becomes over-dominant, and the other side becomes inept and retained and retarded. And so one's a Pentium processor and one's a DOS computer. It just doesn't jive anymore. And until you start fixing the lifestyle and the breathing patterns and the neurological reflexes and start getting them to fire and wire again properly through the developmental stages, no matter how old or how young you are, it's going to lead to disease.
It's inevitable, isn't it, Doctor?
It's inevitable. It's going to lead to a dysfunctional body and a dysfunctional mind. And so listening to this show and then hearing this message and then taking the responsible steps required for your system to get turned back on is part of that growth and development, where you get to finally recognize, hey, wow, this is probably why I am the way I am. And, oh, wow, I get to finally let go of blaming everything else around me for how I am and actually start doing the work that it requires for me to be responsible and for my own life and take it by the horns and go.
Well, it sounds like a simple thing, but there is some work to be done, isn't there, Doctor?
Oh, yeah. I mean, even Jesus, everybody left him when he said, "You must eat the flesh and drink the blood of the Son of Man." What was he talking about? He wasn't talking about wafers and wine. He was talking about, you all must do the work that I did in order to become free, which is work on yourself. Work on the whole aspects of your life, of what is in you that doesn't work for you, and what should work for you is life-giving energy.
Absolutely. Here's our last break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, we are private, no-charge consultation. Here's that number one last time, 314-878-6868. 3 minutes, Doctor.
So like we said right before the break, everybody left. They're like, this teaching's way too hard. And it's the same thing. We're experiencing the same thing now. This is work. You need to be involved in your life, and nobody or no thing is going to make you better. And so that's why at our office what we do is we help guide you to experiencing the power that's in you that helps heal you, and get that moving, get that flowing, and then teach you the tools to then take full action steps in your life. And whether you're a little baby or a grown adult, it's all about correcting and getting the synapses and the neurological system working again through these neonatal reflexes. That's what we do here all day long. So people are always wondering, always asking, so what does Dr. Phil do? He helps fix the reflexes in my body that keep me stuck, that should have been there to help me grow, that are no longer helping me grow, and helping me connect to myself and to my environment and to my world. And so that's what we do. And like we talked about in many shows, it's a spectrum. It can be from as little as pain and suffering to anxiety and fear to ADD all the way to autism, or it could be as little as a headache or a migraine to a concussion, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, digestive problems, cancer, hormonal imbalances. They're all connected to these reflexive patterns that got retained due to stresses and traumas in our life that need to be reactivated and turned back on for your well-being.
A complete program.
A complete program.
Well, it is. And it is so sideways with allopathic medicine that it's almost like two different worlds, Doctor. It is two different worlds. Seriously.
Well, that's what we talk about. We mentioned that. We're talking about vitalistic medicine. We're not talking about allopathic medicine. It's a completely different ideology, completely different perception, different approach, different everything. Even though sometimes it might sound and look a little similar, it's a very different system, and it's a system that taps into your power versus saying, you don't have it in you, here, take this, or let's cut this out because it doesn't work for you anymore and you don't need it. Right.
That's a organ left over from evolutionary times that you don't need it anymore, serves no useful purpose.
No. I just mentioned to a lady the other day, I'm like, well, this issue that you have is because of your gallbladder problem. She's like, I don't have a gallbladder. I mean, I just told you have a gallbladder problem.
Doctor, thank you. We'll have you back next Tuesday morning. Appreciate it.
All right, have a good one.
That's it for the day. That's it for the week. We got...